plane carrying 64 people has collided with a helicopter in Washington, D.C. At 8:47 local time, the American airline flight 5342 was coming in to land at the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport when it hit a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. Both aircraft crashed into the Potomac River, with the plane breaking into two pieces. An unnamed source has said that around 19 bodies have been recovered from the river, but so far no death toll has been given. While the cause of the crash is currently unknown, the FBI says that there is no evidence of criminality or terrorism. Here is what some aviation experts had to say to Times Radio.
The Washington airspace around Reagan Airport is one of the most heavily controlled airspaces in the world. And what I mean by that is civilian air traffic is directed to go specifically down specific corridors to land on airfields, take off. They've got to go a specific way. They've got to follow a particular pattern, and there is no discretion allowed. So it's very procedural. It's heavily controlled. What happened on this particular night, though, was that there was a military aircraft also involved in that control zone. Now, that's not unusual, but those military aircraft, I know firsthand, tend to have a little bit more latitude, because the military aircraft, particularly on this case a Black Hawk, might well have been on some sort of special secret military mission. It may have been part of a security detail. It may have been part of President Trump's detail. Who knows? And therefore, they don't fall under the same rules. They are asked by air traffic. They're told to keep their eyes open, but they are much more left to their own devices as long as they understand. And they build a mental picture. When I was a military flying, they called it situational awareness. And I suspect that's what they're relying on in that control zone. The visibility was good. I think what the trouble is, the investigation is going to focus on this Bombardier aircraft. At the very last minute was asked to change runways. So it was asked to go onto a shorter runway 33 at Ronald Reagan. Now, that in itself is no great thing. What it does mean is that aircraft would have had to maneuver from its original flight path to reposition itself to come down on a different approach path to runway 33. And that actually took it over the Potomac River. And it would have been interesting, therefore, that the pilot of the military helicopter might have assumed that everything was coming down one way and up another way, up funnels to the main runway, and maybe didn't pick up the fact that this other aircraft was asked to do a different approach, therefore would be in a bit of the sky that he wouldn't have been expecting it to be. All of that is coherent with A, both aircraft falling in the Potomac River, and B, the radio calls from Dulles Tower, the Washington Tower, that basically said, military aircraft, have you seen this civilian aircraft? And there was no reply. That for me means that military guy wasn't expecting to see it, suddenly went, holy, which aircraft? Didn't reply, and tragically that seems to have ended in a horrendous accident.
This was a training flight of the helicopter. Apparently did not have its ADSB tracking system turned on. This is the signal that's sent out to air traffic control to track aircraft. And it also is a vital component of another system called TCAS, which is Traffic Collision Avoidance System, fitted to all commercial aircraft and military aircraft, which alerts them to other aircraft on a collision course. But the ADSB must be turned on.
So the helicopters must fly along the river. Clearly, they're allowed when they're flying in and out of the White House. So when they've observed the Vice President, they've gone to the Pentagon, they deviate from the river. But generally, they'll fly at a certain altitude very, very strictly, like they do in London as well. The heli lanes are very strictly controlled. That if you're flying in London, you must be over the river unless you're going into somewhere to land. And then the planes coming into land at ECA are obviously above that. But they also have to follow the river for exactly this sort of scenario, that if something did go wrong, that they're not going to crash into buildings or high populated areas.
Does that mean that the helicopter was too high?
It's hard to say. Looking at that CCTV that you've seen as well, it does seem that the plane was quite low. So it may be that the helicopter itself was absolutely flying at the altitude it should have been flying, but it just was in the wrong place at that altitude, and then met the plane when it was on short finals to land. It's hard because we don't know. Nobody's obviously seen the black box recordings to know what the aircraft, the helicopter had, if there was any collision avoidance software or alarms that may or may not have alarmed. But military helicopter pilots are extremely well trained, so it is very hard to understand how this could have happened, particularly with air traffic control asking them if they'd seen the aircraft ahead.
The commercial flight was travelling from Kansas, and the passengers on board included the United States figure skating team and 2 Russian champions. The US Army helicopter was carrying out a training flight when the collision happened and was believed to be carrying 3 soldiers. 300 responders are working on the scene, and conditions have been described as extremely rough and windy.
Whilst they're clearly trying to rescue survivors at the moment, but I have to say the accident appeared to happen about 400 feet at about 140 miles an hour, and that's not very survivable. And the Potomac River is about 1 degree centigrade, so the last place you want to be doing if there were any hopes of surviving is ending up in a 1 degree centigrade water. So I have to say it looks pretty bleak for the people. I think there'll be an outstanding rescue effort going on, but my thoughts go and prayers go out to those who have lost loved ones in this tragic accident.
Commercial plane crashes in America are extremely rare, and this is the first fatal crash in the US since 2009. However, there's been reports of several near misses at the Ronald Reagan Airport, including a near collision last May, which had raised alarm.
My own experience of civilian air transport, and particularly military air traffic control zones and civil air traffic control zones, is they are very good. They operate very tight procedures. But inevitably, these are very busy areas. There's lots going on. It relies on extremely well qualified, very well trained air traffic controllers to be on top of their game, and for the pilots, both military and civilian, also to follow controls or to listen carefully and understand. Tragically, human mistakes do happen. The one thing I know about the airline world is that every time there's even a near miss, we might think it's scary, but actually sometimes it's something fairly innocuous, but they try and learn from it. They try and change procedures to try and make it better. It is still the safest way for any of us to travel anywhere around the world, and that's largely a testament to the very high safety standards that are applied. But occasionally things go wrong, and tragically last night or in the early hours of the morning in the UK, a lot of people have met their demise in a very tragic accident.
I presume there's going to be an inquiry into this. Could you tell me what an inquiry will look like? What's the procedures that you go through for that?
Yes, whether it's a military accident or a civilian accident, and I suspect on this occasion that they'll both work together. There's an air accident investigation board that will sit. Initially, there'll be lots of questions about, the aircraft. Was the Bombardier CRJ-70 serviceable? Was the Black Hawk serviceable? Were they following the right procedures? It'll pull all the air traffic control tapes, the audio tapes. It'll pull the radar tracks. It'll work out where they were coming from and everything. They'll pull the accident data recorders from the aircraft as well. And it takes time, but all of that gets pieced together. And in my experience, it provides a very, very clear indication of what's going on. We tend to imagine, we've seen lots of these movies that, you have to find forensic ways to find out what happened. Most often than not, these modern accidents, because there is so much data stored, once you've got it all out and can play it all through, it becomes pretty evident what's happened. That does take time. But understandably, the authorities will absolutely focus on that in a very professional investigation, and lessons undoubtedly will be learnt from that.
Donald Trump has called the crash a terrible accident that shouldn't have happened, and he's monitoring the situation. The Kremlin has also expressed condolences to family and friends of those involved in the crash.